where we dare to have moxie for what matters. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Julia, and we're your new loudmouth, change-making, do-gooder best friends, here to embolden you to take more action, risk, and heart towards creating a more just, equitable, and brave world.
If you are looking to explore new ways to expand your supporter base, get more dads involved in your mission, and help dismantle the patriarchy, then this is the episode for you.
So in honor of Father's Day, we wanted to do a special little episode to highlight dads and the men in our lives and all the men doing such good work in the world. So we're going to be talking to you about, their involvement in social issues and social service issues, and how to engage more men in your cause.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I think we picked out this episode thinking that it was going to kind of be an easy episode, that it was going to kind of be like, a softball, and that it was going to be a little bit fluff. And
yeah.
We were able to kind of locate some other people chatting about this, and we were a little thrown by some of the recommendations that we were finding. They've just felt very kind of surface and not very well thought out. And so then we dug in a little bit more and dug in and found a research study that a lot of what we're going to be talking about today was based on. And it's funny because we didn't expect this to kind of put its roots quite as deep in us as it has, and we're really excited about how it kind of caused us to be more inquisitive about this subject and think about it.
Really deep. It is a super deep subject, and it just goes back through like the history of time. Or like how to get more dads involved. That's easy. We just look at a bunch of tips and stuff, and they were like, no, this is like goes back through human history. Like why we are not seeing as many dads and men involved as we would like to. So
yeah, and we I know I added in help dismantle the patriarchy is one of our like results and goals from today. And Julia was like, "Do we want to say that?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, because here's the thing: Julia and I are both raging feminists, and we're very interested in exploring, how society and societal expectations limit human beings and maybe make human beings move away from who they just would be without these societal expectations. And we're really interested in how patriarchy harms men as much as women, right? Because when you think about that caricature type, stereotype of men being this like stoic entity with not expressing their emotions all over the place. I think that it does do some harm to the men in our lives to have this expectation laid on them that they're supposed to be like devoid of emotion, and that their top priority for life should be being a breadwinner and being economically productive. And if you are not a perfect economically productive widget, then what is your value as a human being to our society? So we find these questions very, very interesting. We're just gonna try our best to not dig into it quite so much.
I know.
But we did find this really great study. It's an older study. It's from 1998-99. The author is Stephanie T. Blackman, and she did a research study on men who were involved in volunteer work. So we're going to share that in the show notes, and we definitely, if this sparks your interest, just any of the things that we're kind of discussing, feel free to go over and snag it. It's a wonderful read. It's long, it's like 60 pages, but we definitely recommend it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so to get started, we're going to talk about breadwinner syndrome. So I have two sons. Michelle has a son, and we're both married. We both have husbands, and this has been like a big discussion in my household, Michelle. Like you've been talking with your husband about it. We've had some really interesting discussions, and really learning about this concept of the breadwinner syndrome and how it impacts men and volunteering and the rate at which they volunteer. So it's really interesting. Fact is that they found that like women, regardless of whether they work or stay home, volunteer at the same rate. And men, if they, so it made people think like if women, whether they stay home or work, volunteer, this is not just a matter of like convenience, whether or not like people volunteer and stuff like that as women are moving into the workforce. So like I think it's got more people thinking. It's definitely got me thinking a lot more. So breadwinner syndrome is this idea. Okay, I'm going to read this study. 24% of participants specifically referred to the societal expectation that men devote their energy to earning money, or that anything short of such effort is either unacceptable or somehow not living up to their potential. And I am finding that's really, really true. So like men at contribution to society is earning a paycheck. Like they own that, like they feel that through and through, and like we're raising our sons to even in today's age to like believe that that is like their value and stuff like that. And we're still have the societal expectation that charity work is women's work, and
Social
therefore
work, even any kind of social work, right?
social involvement, social anything like that, that's women's work. And so men like don't associate it with them at all. They're like, it doesn't occur to them to get involved in these social services and issues because they're already contributing to society with this paycheck. And the thing is why it's interesting is like now women are earning paychecks, but they still own volunteerism. They still own charity work. It's still seen as like women's work. So like, why is this still continuing to happen, even though women are in the workforce, almost, at the same number amount as like men and stuff. So it's really fascinating. I'm like, my brain is going 100 miles a minute of like all these things we've learned about the breadwinner syndrome and like keeping it like contained and stuff like that. It's so fascinating. Please check out this study. It's just incredible the things that you learn. So, and another kind of reason why this is a really important topic and why it can be a really huge improvement for men as well is that by removing men from social services work and like volunteering, and helping people out and getting into, the thick of it and into the trenches of humanity, we've actually, it's kind of like stunted this learning developmental part in them where they can't cope with some social issues the way that women can. That it's actually really important for human beings, doesn't matter what your gender is, to serve people and to, and to help people and get into the trenches with people and to see how other people live and, to see so many degrees of how people live. It's an actual developmental thing that human beings need in interacting with each other because it helps them in their own lives. And when we take men outside of charity work, they actually don't grow this really important human skill. Because we make it women's work. We put them in the trenches. We let them see the ugly, and we let them see the rise of people out of some of these situations and stuff like that. So, and then another really neat reason that's kind of really near and dear to my heart, especially with having sons, is if we have more men in doing volunteer work and we are including them more and we are creating spaces that men feel more comfortable in contributing, that means that we're going to have a lot more positive male role models, and women are doing such incredible things and it's definitely time for women and stuff like that. But as someone like with teenage sons, like, yeah, I want that for them. I absolutely want that for them to see more men you know, big-hearted men getting out there and getting involved in volunteer work that is more heartfelt, like more emotional, you know, service type of a things. And for them not to feel like they don't belong in that space. Like, I don't want a world where like my sons don't feel like they can serve people in certain situations, that they can only serve you know, their neighborhood if they have like a tree fall down or, you know, like something like that. I want them to feel like if a cause speaks to them, there's nothing holding them back from that besides, like, you know, themselves, you know. So
Absolutely.
let's
I
create
think the really interesting thing about this study, right, is she did only include, and she says this when you read the study, she says, you know, there's a caveat here that I only included men who were involved in volunteer work. So it's definitely a skewed study group.
Okay.
There were no men involved in the study who don't volunteer. So a lot of those men, you know, in the study talking about what prevents men, you know, what was hard for them about approaching volunteer work and getting into volunteer work. There are a lot of really good little snippets of information. But they, you know, there's definitely this line that we skirt as we're talking about this issue of, you know, stereotyping of, are we thinking things in a stereotyped manner? Is this really true to the men that we're trying to address? And, you know, coming back to this point of like, what is the why of appealing to that? Like, why is that important to my organization? Why should I think about that?
Yeah.
Well, you know, basically, for me, thinking about examining how we can attract different subsets of people is always going to help us uncover critical aspects of who we are and are not appealing to, and why we are appealing to those people. So like, even if you're not necessarily interested in appealing to more men, if you can sit down and think about, you know, why men would or wouldn't be attracted to your cause, then it's still going to help you understand more about who you are appealing to, and whether you are actually targeting the groups that you are attempting to. So it's a great thought experiment for any organization, whether or not they're really interested in kind of digging into this idea of appealing more to dads. You know, as Julia said, we both have sons, and we're married, and you know, my history, I had a couple of broken relationships, abusive relationships. And so, you know, I come to my space in trying to make society better, you know, with this extra emotional trauma and baggage from having these gender roles really be harmful in my life. And I certainly want to find ways that my boys are going to be able to be healthy, fulfilled individuals who don't victimize other people. And it was interesting how much that came up as we were discussing, like, what is the how do you appeal to dads, and why is that important? And how do I figure out whether my organization should appeal to dads? And you know, it is interesting, adding men to your pool of volunteers can have a variety of implications for your program, not all of which are positive. Understanding the potential impacts of greater number of male volunteers may add to your excitement about this cause. The same understanding, however, should also call attention to the possibility that recruitment of male volunteers may not suit your program. It may generate additional work for you or your coworkers, or it may harbor unforeseen consequences, and legal discrimination and organizational policy issues must also be taken into consideration. And that's what, you know, Stephanie Blackman talks about in her study. She's really talking about, like, that was why we found this document to be so great. It like covered all these questions. It really you know, has these little call out boxes that talk about the extra, like, little outlying things that should be brought to somebody's attention as they're considering this. And what we don't want to happen is we don't want people to go like, oh, this sounds like this sounds like a really ugly space, and there's a lot of potential pitfalls, and so maybe I don't want to engage with the work of trying to deal with whether I should be appealing to more men. And I would actually encourage you um, to not engage in withdrawing from it, because it does sound like it can get difficult and it can get complicated and it can raise some extra risk management issues for your organization. Because even if you go through the motions of some of the things that are being suggested here and you end up deciding that appealing to more men is not right for your organization, you're going to benefit from the work of examining how you could, examining who you are appealing to and all that. So
Yeah, you should, whether or not like your organization like really appeals to men, like really understand that it's going to be good for any organization to really understand their audience and who they should be targeting their campaigns and their events around, and catering kind of to, you may have the type of organization that equally appeals to both men and women, so there's, that can still be really useful to you. You may have the kind of organization that is women just really seem to really resonate with it, and it seems to be a safer space for women to work within, and go for that. There might not be a need for you to appeal to more men, and like Michelle was saying, you may not even have the capacity, or the resources or the staff, to really have a campaign to do that. So those are all valid reasons whether to consider appealing, taking the effort and all the resources to start appealing to more men. Ways, some of the filter questions you can kind of use to help define like whether or not you need to appeal to more men to create more campaigns towards that and stuff, and more efforts towards that. There's three questions you can ask yourself. One is, why might I want to have more male volunteers? Really examine that. Why do you want more male volunteers? What qualities do male volunteers offer this program or my cause that differ from female volunteers? And what roles and responsibilities do I want to recruit male volunteers for? Having something very, very specific is really, really important. So those are really good filter questions. And if you've got pretty good positive on those, and you're like, yeah, it's going to be actually a really fantastic thing to get more men involved in this cause. Let's make it happen. It's going to be worth it. Go for it. I actually worked with within like a sponsorship program where we had to examine that. Like, we had a very high rate of female sponsors for students, and where I was working, the country that we were working with, like there's a really high rate of absentee fathers in their culture and stuff like that, due to a lot of like cultural issues and poverty and stuff like that. So there's a lot of absentee dads, and we actually found that it would be incredibly beneficial for the young men, the young students, to have some more positive like male role models, and because they didn't have a high rate of that, and like a lot of the fathers, they either like didn't know or were not involved, or were in a really abusive situation, and so and they knew nothing else. They were not exposed. They do not have the resources to know any other representation of men. And we found that to battle some of the things within our cause that we were trying to accomplish, that having more men involved in the sponsorship program was actually would be incredibly beneficial to the goals of the organization. So in that scenario, that would be, this is a really good indicator of like, with those questions, filtering through those questions, yeah, this is going to be worth the time and a little bit of sacrifice, to kind of redirect this and have the male influence as a resource. So yeah.
The other thing that Stephanie Blackman really urged people to keep in mind, if you're ready to go ahead and kick this into gear, you're really gonna engage in this thought experiment. You're gonna examine how your organization can attract more men, she did say, you know, keep the following questions in mind. So, you know, number one, as I'm looking through the study and we're talking about strategies of how to attract more men, like, does this strategy apply to my organization? How might I be able to tweak the principles of the strategy to fit my needs? Have I tried any of these strategies before? How many times? For how long? Has it worked? Why do I think it has or has not been a good strategy for our organization? Are there any structural barriers, policies, budget, et cetera, to implementing these strategies? How might other staff respond to using this strategy? Clients, current volunteers, right? Because it's one thing to take on trying to recruit an entire base of, you know, new volunteers, but even no matter whether they're men or not, you should ask yourself, you know, is bringing in this new group of volunteers going to conflict or cause, you know, fallout from any of my current volunteers? And, you know, is that good, bad, worth it? How is it going to impact them? How realistic is this strategy for my situation? And how useful is this strategy in relation to others? So, you know, now that you're at the point where you're like, okay, yeah, cool, let's talk about this. Let's really engage with this. Let's do this thought experiment. How do we get started? What are some strategies that we can use to try and attract more men, appeal to dads specifically, you know, getting them involved with the organization? Well, we're going to start with some short-term strategies. So some things that you can implement really, really quickly in your organization is, you know, number one, perform a study with men who are already involved in your organization. If you have male volunteers, talk to them. Like, what attracted them? What was it that got them involved? What kind of events or situations are they getting involved because they have people in their own inner circle who are struggling with the same thing as people in the group of beneficiaries that your organization helps to address, you know? Or was it just a family member was involved and that really appealed to them because they had this family member who was coming home with these great stories of how rewarding this experience was, and maybe that's how they got involved. If you have men already involved in your organization, that can give you a really great head start in determining what ways are going to be effective in attracting more volunteers like that. Or, you know, if they're not your favorite type of volunteer, maybe you'll find ways that you don't want to engage in. But it's a great place to start. And if you don't have any, you can potentially collaborate with some other organizations who might have more men involved and start taking a look at some of their volunteers, depending on your networking opportunities.
Yeah. And then the second thing you can do is a direct ask. So because volunteerism has been so long associated with women's work and stuff like that, it actually doesn't occur to men to often jump in there. When it was kind of interesting in this study, when people would put out a bulletin or whatever and ask for like, hey, so-and-so's got this problem, who would like to volunteer? Like, it really like just goes over the men's head, understandably, you know, because, you know, they already contribute in all these ways that society tells them that they're supposed to contribute. So so men right now, where they're at in society, a lot of them, not all of them, okay, they just need a direct ask. You just need to ask them one-on-one, you know, send out a message. It can be a short text, go up to them, call them, you know, just make it really, really direct, you know, and they are much more likely to be happy to get involved. They just didn't realize that you wanted them specifically. So, and plus that always just feels good. That is actually across the board always more effective, no matter what your gender is, but we find it like even more effective with men if you're seeing like a big absence of the men volunteering in something. And then another way to kind of really be direct about it is be really specific on what you're asking them to contribute to. Really, really specific. What is the goal of it? What is their role in it? You know, and they're going to feel a lot more comfortable saying yes when they like have the whole picture, you know, that they can like from A to Z, and they know how that they can function in your charity. So
clarity became a recurring theme throughout that study, right? Just being clear and upfront, right? And if we think about all the things that are associated with men and how men are successful, like being clear and upfront and clearly communicating quickly, being brief, is a virtue of theirs. So being able to have already thought through, like, not only is this going to give you the feel goods, but like, this is specifically why we need you men to be involved in this. Like, this is the benefit. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a benefit that is to them, but maybe a benefit specifically about why them being involved is a benefit to the people you want them to serve.
It's also kind of refreshing. It's kind of refreshing that, like, that you don't always have to like go in this whole flattery way around, like just asking men, you just be like, hey, Joe, like, hey, can you come over here and, sit with so-and-so and, be a companion to them, and that's what we need. And it, takes a few minutes and stuff like that. So there's some like many benefits, and some women are like that too. But I prefer a little more hand holding when I'm being asked to do something. And I definitely like it coming from someone I know who's like my friend and my buddy, and I like it a little more camaraderie and stuff like that. But I do know, like, we're seeing in these studies that, like, be direct, be quick about it, and you're going to see really good results from those.
Absolutely. Things. A couple more short-term strategies for getting dads involved. Create events catered to men's experiences. Maybe create father-child events depending on the type of organization that you have. Also, Julia had a great anecdote about an event that she went to that was planned by men. And it actually brought me back to the question of, like, could having men plan a volunteer event for help, plan a volunteer event for other men specifically to volunteer in? Will that help create a more rewarding experience for men? And it's funny because your story was like, you showed up, it was an event
volunteer event that was like the men and women in my church community and stuff like that. We were invited to. They usually just have like the women do a lot of the service projects, but this one was special where the men and the women were both invited to like serve. But the men planned the whole thing. So we got there and everything was like very strategically like set up in the most like efficient way possible. And like as soon as they got done with like the opening prayer, we were all just straight to like these tables, and the whole thing was done silently, completely nobody speaking, just the rattle of bags,
no music
no music, no words, just like the only words you would ever hear would be like, do we have another one of these? Could you hand me that? That was it. And then like it was done, the entire service project was done in like 5-6 minutes. And they were all standing there. And then they were like, okay, now you can grab, for dinner, we thought it would be really nice to have like options of grab and go. So you can just grab your cold cut sandwiches and leave, or you may stay and visit. And like everyone just left. And like all the women are like looking at each other like, we're just leaving now. Nobody's even spoken to each other. We're like, we gotta let it talk, because this is not a fiction if you do the talking, and like the men all looked very satisfied that like this entire event that women would take 2 hours to do, they got done in less than 10 minutes. Congratulations.
like think of the return on investment. And I think we definitely like Stephanie Blackman says, we definitely kind of border on thinking about things in a very stereotypical way. But I mean, if the men are planning an event and the service project gets done extremely quickly, and then you still have the opportunity to stay around and have that social part, I mean, I more and more, like, over the course of reading this study, what was coming up was like, there's this kind of high bar of entry to getting men involved. And then once they're involved, if they're not comfortable, they're not coming back. If they're not feeling like they're making an impact, like their time is making a difference, it's very like A plus B equals C to them. Like if they don't see the impact of their involvement, they're not coming back, because they have a lot of demand for their time, and they are very like upfront and abrupt with each other. And I think that, you know, speaking as a woman who's been involved in a lot of charity work, like there's a whole lot of component about that that's like social, that's about, you know, connecting with other people who are like-minded, who want to be involved in the same kind of causes that I want to be involved in. Um, a lot of my networking contacts are met through charity events. Like I see it as like this whole community building exercise, but that's not necessarily how men are seeing it. And, you know, if you can have an event planned by men for men, and we don't have to get so stereotypical that we're like, men will only come if it's a golf tournament, men will only come if it's a casino night, men will only do it if we do it this way. But certainly exploring those ways in which it makes that impact a lot more efficient, and it makes it a lot more upfront and clear that they can come in and get like a whole service project done and set aside in like 10 minutes, and then get on with their day. Like they feel good about that. That makes them feel good, and making them feel good is one of the most important components that we're seeing come out of this study, right?
It's really
making
like that
them feel rewarded in their own language. The other thing that is a great short-term strategy for getting more dads involved and keeping them involved is, you know, monitoring and adjusting power dynamics. They were talking about men, and I talked to my husband about this. My husband, he has a degree in psychology, and he's worked in social services, and in daycares when he was younger, and in after-school programs. And the thing that he said was like, you know, men really want to know that they are competent at what they're doing. It's something that's heavily emphasized in the professional world. They don't want to feel like they're not knowing, like they don't know what they're doing. So Stephanie Blackman highlights the fact that you know, setting this kind of culture for volunteers where they're not required to know everything, and there's a system in place to help them become more knowledgeable, takes a lot of that pressure off of a man who walks in and feels like they're supposed to know the program. And focusing on a flat management hierarchy, you know, where that is where everything's a little bit more about the results, the collaboration, like, and less about like who's answering to whom. And that one's going, you know, all of these that we're talking about really are going to help you appeal to more people in general. But definitely it will certainly see a big return on investment with men as a group specifically.
Another thing that was in this study and some of the other ones that we did was having you know, contacting some men like ahead of time to kind of be there, to kind of, if they're, you know, your event is like mingled like with women and stuff like that, how to create an environment that at least has space for men to be in that environment that they're comfortable in, at least until society starts catching up, right? Like, and so one of the ways to kind of have like an event that has both genders at it that are comfortable is having men you ask ahead of time to come and, you know, be your male representative at your event and kind of help, like, because they found that like if there's a man in an event and another man shows up at an event, and even if they don't know each other, they find that eventually at some point they're next to each other. Like, you know,
they're creating that safe space.
And you know what I think that just goes really back to like, for so long we take men out of so many spaces, right? We take them out of child spaces. Yeah, we take them out of like just being around children. We take them out of being around women. You know, we take them out of all of these spaces and we put them in this breadwinner spot, right? And they just for so long that it's hard for them to interact in some of these spaces because they've not been taught, like, you know, they've not been taught this is a world that they know of. So like just be like accommodating, but it's kind of cool, this idea of like bringing another like man in to kind of help, you know, get men into that volunteering role and help them like really know what to do and feel comfortable in that space. And it's the first step, right? Like it's the first step is getting them comfy and breaking down like some of these rules and these boundaries, you know, like, and be like, hey, look, you're safe, you know, like
What's really
we're
interesting
people
is so
here.
much of it is about like the internal turmoil that happens around this stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
one of the quotes from the men in the study was like they were really interested in childcare, and then you know, they went home and they came back a little bit later and they're like, I was ridiculed for being so excited about, you know, engaging in childcare. And then there's this whole question of whether, you know, I'm looking to victimize people, and so then they don't want to be involved. And so your goal is just to kind of alleviate stress and discomfort. Don't kill yourself, but definitely if you're being intentional about trying to find ways to make the environment more, you know, meet them at their comfort level, then that's a good practice with any volunteer.
Anybody, we would want the same thing for women, like any space that like
Absolutely.
has been inherently male and women aren't quite sure like how they fit in that space, or if they're going to be respected in that space, or if they're welcome in that space. We would want, it would mean so much to us to have some accommodations to like where we're at, you know,
Yeah.
you know, as we're trying to heal so many of these things and try to find out like what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man, and like and the fact that we're just learning as a society that we're the only ones that get to define that, right? So we still have a long like way to learn with that. Another thing about this is kind of really neat that like really helps men, that I kind of joked about a little bit with my family, is that men really, really respond to positive reinforcement, which shouldn't be a surprise. But so like things like rewards and trophies can look like t-shirts. So
Yes,
I
swag
actually,
bag, trophies. Yeah.
yeah, I
Like, what is
actually
a socially acceptable memento of my
for your,
experience? For a guy, a t-shirt is really meaningful. I think you were surprised by that, to find
I
out that you're
was. I thought t-shirts were obsolete. Like nobody wants your brand or your event on their t-shirt, because I don't. Like I use those things for paint shirt and stuff like that. But then I was asking my husband and my children about this stat about men needing like these kind of mementos or these trophies or this a little reward for their thing. He goes, "Oh yeah, we love t-shirts. We love getting a t-shirt at the end of doing like a big, huge volunteer project, because it's like a trophy you can wear and it's
Yep.
really, really rewarding and it means a lot to them, you know? And, you know, so, I mean, t-shirts are still relevant. I'm going to eat my words a little bit here. Like, you know, it
And
can
I
be
know to
worth
a lot of women, the service is its own reward, right? There's that whole like,
the camaraderie. Yeah, it's the
yeah,
camaraderie aspect of it is why women go back. Yeah.
and men are busy doing their service to society by being the breadwinners, you know. Even if they're progressive, even if they're, you know, feminist allies, they still feel that pressure. I know my husband certainly um, has told me about the ways that, you know, sex came into play in his career pursuits, and keeping him out of some of the roles that he would have really enjoyed. He felt like he was really good at, but they weren't seen as traditional men's roles. And you know, there was so much risk involved because he wanted to run a daycare, and he was like, you know, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have children, and people were kind of looking at me like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
But he was really, really good at working with kids. That was why he got into psychology, is he thought he wanted to become a school counselor. And then he did his degree, and he went and did a lot of the training hours that he needed to then find out that school counseling is not about psychological intervention at an early age like he thought that it was designed for, and it ends up being a whole lot more about managing the educational pursuits of students. And he was like, you know, you've got all these psychology degrees, and then you're just like managing people's credit schedules. And so he was still trying to find a way to be able to be involved with kids and early intervention with their mental health, and helping them create full and happy lives. And it was just a really hard space for him to be in, because childcare, teaching, you know, that kind of social aspect of child rearing is a very alien space for men. And yeah,
it goes back to like men, like I'm kind of excited for this because I'm just like learning about, you know, feminism in myself and breaking down the patriarchy. But like the thoughts that come back with like learning this is like men haven't really had the chance to really bloom either. They can't bloom under this patriarchy either, you know, and like men are capable of so many cool dynamic things that like society also oppresses them, you know,
yep.
from. And just being like part of, we can do these small things to be a part of this movement of breaking down these invisible rules that almost nobody made up, right? Nobody really made these up. These were like things that like slowly like grew out of this circumstance or this circumstance, and it grew into this really unhealthy thing that's, it's unhealthy for men and women. And like what the exciting thing of looking at the future with this idea of like breaking down these rules and getting rid of these silly rules that like don't, you know, like are not serving anybody, is the fact that like what are we capable of? Like
yeah.
how, you know, if we got rid of all these rules and we let men, you know, discover who they are and what they're good at, and let women do the same thing, and you know, and all the in-betweens and all, you know, all that, and people really just being who they are, like what we could be capable of is so exciting, right? So
yeah.
exciting. So and then I could go on about how exciting the future looks, you guys.
Well, we don't need this to be an hour and 20-minute long podcast.
Yeah. We're gonna pivot on to the long-term strategy. So those are some like quick things that you can do to implement like right now that we just discussed. Some of these things, if you want to like really get into this movement and help break down these things, it could be really beneficial for your cause. It could actually be a really good parallel like campaign for like your cause or something like that, or mission of your cause. Can that be part of your cause to break down these stereotypes? Does it boost your you know, your social impact? One of the ways is equating men with volunteerism. Now this is a long-term game with equating men, but you can be a part of it. We need more people to be a part of this you know, kind of movement of showing men in like different lights, and dads in different lights, and dads in different kind of roles. One of the ways you can participate is think about doing a campaign. Doing a campaign, a really long campaign, where your focus is on showing like men in your advertisements, like and fathers,
representation.
Representing men in a really positive way, you know, bringing their talents and all their different talents to these volunteer opportunities, and just so they can see it, right? So they can see what that looks like, because some of them don't even know what that looks like. They've never seen a man in you know, in a caring capacity. I would even challenge it to go a little bit further, because we do see things like men in service where they'll come do like labor type service. That's a lot more common, but we don't often call men to, you know, sit with somebody when they're grieving, you know. We don't often, you know, call men to, you know, even mentoring kind of situations. That's a lot, you know, gets a little more female there. We don't see men in these nurturing roles. You know, when was the last time like we as a society or like a group, think of your cause, looked at the men to assign like dinners, you know, to a family who's going through something, or to check on somebody in the hospital? Why are we not asking? So like maybe having depictions in your imagery of men in these really soft roles, because you know what, I know some men that are really, really good at it. My husband is a really, really good nurturer, and he's just naturally at it, and he never talks about himself in that role as a nurturer. He would never talk to his buddies about some cool thing that he did where he was in a nurturing role. It wouldn't occur to him to share that with his buddies as like the latest thing that's happened with him. He wouldn't talk about
Right.
that. And we want them to do more of that. And that starts with like your imagery, your campaigns, your messaging that you're putting in, putting out there into the public, and just really shining a light in a really positive, public way, and to show more men that, there's space for them there and we need them. And then, okay, and then we have like having an established avatar of your ideal male supporter. That's really helps you understand that audience. If you we have, there's a lot of resources out there on how to and narrow down your target audience that you can go through and just like really figure out what is your male demographic really like, what are their hobbies, what are things that they'd be really interested in,
Where do they hang out?
where they hang out, what's their age range, does this person most likely to be a dad in your area, and area specific too. So like different areas would have like probably different kind of men in different stages. If you're in a college town, the male getting more men involved is very different from going to like a really small town where it's mostly families. It's going to be a different appeal.
One of the things that Stephanie mentioned, or she had highlighted in her study, was like the athletes wanted one, right? Where she had like, there was a specific charity that, worked with like physical function of the body. And so they were looking for athletes. They were looking for male athletes who were involved in like the local colleges and stuff, right? So, if your ideal supporter is a young unmarried college student with lots of time on their hands who wants to give back to society, then, maybe you're putting calls out to places where men traditionally spend time. And that's not to say that there's not female athletes. There absolutely are. And attracting more female athletes may be super helpful, but maybe some of the people who are benefiting from your cause need to have a male athlete in order to be able to maximize what they're receiving. Because we as social enterprises, as charity organizations, we can give people experiences and things that are going to help them in their lives. But if we're not giving it to them in the way that they maybe need to receive it, they're not going to get a maximum return on that investment that we're giving them, right? It's like you were talking about maybe needing more male role models for the younger men in the community that you guys were serving. Are they going to have a benefit from having more strong role models, even if those role models are female? Absolutely. But specifically, the boys in that community can benefit from the representation of seeing strong male role models who serve and who provide, volunteer their time to help people. Yeah. Also, the other couple other long-term strategies here is helping men find time for volunteering. I found this one very interesting because I've been a working parent and a professional, and so I immediately kind of backlash to this one. We're like, women need help finding time outside of their jobs too. But that means that this tactic is going to be beneficial for anyone who's a professional. If you can, specifically for men, breaking the habit of not volunteering because they're not feeling society call them to service work. So making those first steps to volunteering as easy as possible, and using a little bit of friendly competition, in some of the campaigns that you're running to attract more volunteers is going to help you retain male volunteers after they come that first time. And think about like, what volunteer opportunities am I making available? I think a lot of us in the past year with the pandemic have had to kind of put on our thinking caps and think about like, how are my volunteer opportunities suiting people's needs? Because if all of your volunteer opportunities were in-person volunteer opportunities, you probably had to pivot. And utilizing that as a skill and looking at, do we have an opportunity to create mini volunteer events, right? Things where people can stop by on their way home from work and do 20 minutes worth of service project and help us make this big impact where, 2 weeks out, maybe somebody's been able to stop by once or twice, but 2 weeks out, we're able to help this like a community of people in a big way, or help a big community of people in a small way. Having little speed dating type of events where you have several different mini volunteering opportunities where people can like insert themselves into the way that you call for volunteers, and find several different ways that you are trying to attract people. Maybe one of those is going to resonate with them, and if they can kind of try on a couple of them, even if it's not all in the same day, but maybe over the course of a few weeks where you're trying to test some different volunteer opportunities. Innovative things like that are going to help you increase your supporter base. Men, women, older people, younger people, all of the above. You're going to find out what works and what doesn't, and just make sure that you're taking the time to get feedback from people, especially people who have not already been involved in your organization, to see how that is really helping them. The other thing, another long-term strategy for attracting more dads and men, building men's interest in your program activities. So 17% of the participants in Black men's study raised the possibility that some social service programs simply do not interest men, or that administrative participation, working on boards and committees, for example, is more appealing than direct service. So are we taking the time to articulate those as specific supporter needs, as much as we are taking time to articulate the direct service activities that we're having now? Clearly, we probably want to have people in our board roles and committee roles who are familiar with our organization, but sometimes just being able to get to that opportunity somehow is going to be a little bit more appealing for them. Also, one participant in the study theorized that having a cycle of activities for volunteers to rotate through might help keep men interested. Others noted that volunteering gave them an opportunity to do fun stuff that they might not otherwise make time to do, such as going to the movies as a friend or a mentor to someone in need. The gist of the strategy is to think about what men might enjoy in their day-to-day lives and try and integrate those activities into volunteer work. So there's a lot of really good ways that you can approach the thought of appealing to dads, some short-term ways that you can see results if you're going to approach it, some long-term ways that you can, focus on attracting and retaining those male volunteers. And just a final thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was, like how patriarchy shapes and impacts the discussion. And we've said it a couple of times now, but I do want to kind of take a moment here at the end to emphasize that, our societal expectations of the gender roles of men and women is as damaging to men as it is to women. There's unrealistic expectations. There's stereotypes involved, where men are expected to be stoic and emotionless, and it creates this really unhealthy dynamic where men feel pressure not to be themselves to serve the notion of how society perceives them, and women feel pressure to be more like that male stereotype in order to fit in professional ways. So we're erasing the ability for women to be the kind of professionals that women are, and we're making it really hard for men to be human within their capacity. And I say that we are doing it and we are making it because everybody's involved in these systems of sexism and patriarchy. I had a discussion yesterday with my son where we were talking about the fact that, our brains evolutionarily over the past 30,000 years have developed in certain ways to keep us alive and safe and being able to move on and procreate. And those have been great strategies, but the more and more that we move into civilizations where we all kind of live on top of each other, and we have more social interaction, and we have more social interaction with people who are not the same as us. And especially now where we have the ability to connect with people from anywhere through the internet, and we have the responsibility to connect with them, in our professional lives and in the ways that we want to maybe impact volunteerism. We have to be aware of what our default setting is, and our default setting is I'm not sexist because I think I'm not sexist. You're sexist because your brain makes you sexist. Nobody's saying that being sexist in and of itself is something to be ashamed of. It's something to be aware of. It's something to be aware of, that we had that setting because it worked really well for our history and for the ways that our societies were built for a long time. And in the past 200 years, that has changed a lot. Once we developed technology, once we industrialized, once we developed the internet, our world just shifted. And the way that we interact is able to affect bigger swaths of people just by virtue of scale. The fact that we can impact so many people. You get on, you make a Facebook post, you piss some people off. It's going to be some people because people are going to see it because you have that ability to impact people, even if you don't see them every day. So to me, it's a very interesting thing to think about how those systems that worked for us once, maybe we need to approach how to undo them. I know that, whenever I think about organizations who help battered women or abused children, is some of this, some of the way that society kind of leans in these patriarchal ways has been some of the underlying cause of the damage to the people who are hurting. And so if we can find little ways to try and make it a little bit more approachable for men to be involved in service work, for men to have the opportunity to see people living in other situations than what they are familiar with, I mean, that's just universally good when you understand that your experience in the world is not everyone's experience, that your experience may be unique, and that doesn't make your experience any less valid. Or it doesn't make you a bad person for having an experience that's more privileged than other people, but being mindful that your level of privilege makes certain things in your life a choice. I don't have to be involved with politics because I benefit from patriarchy. Those kinds of thoughts, you benefit from patriarchy. You don't have to, you have a choice, but there are people who don't have that choice. And those people could really use an ally who has the ability to impact it, far more deeply and in different ways. So
we
can be that person, be the change.
We can show compassion, right? Like, we're raging feminists, and we think women are awesome. We also think men are really awesome. What we don't think is awesome, but what is the real villain here is toxic masculinity and the way it tries to control so many things. And it's really holding us back. And so and we know as we move as a society, it's so much slower than the individual, and we can, at least I can make, there's things I can do, and we'd like to encourage you to be compassionate about, like as men move through their identity too, and move through this movement. And as we try to understand this concept of who we are and our place in this world, I'm really excited. I'm really excited for human beings. I'm really excited for human beings and the change I have just seen in my lifetime. And I'm really excited for my children, in this movement, that they are going to be a little more freer to really shine with their strengths, their God-given strengths, and that there's going to be more room for them in that way. And these tips, like, sometimes they may seem hard for you, maybe they don't, but if they are seeming hard to you, what really helped me is looking at it in a way of like little boys and having compassion for them as this is the world that they know. This is the world they're already being told as little tiny little boys that they're breadwinners and that's their value. And that's their only.
I think you asked your boys, didn't you, about like what they see as a successful life.
Yeah, I asked my sons, like, how would you describe a successful, happy life? Like, what are the markers for you? And they both said, like, having a really good money-making job. And I was like, oops. I think I missed a few lessons in there in raising my sons, like I'm good in some areas, but like, you know, we got to break
But we
those
want them to
down.
believe that there is inherent value in all people, to be humanitarian, to be able to support people who don't have the same advantages in life as you. You need to be able to see the inherent value in all human beings, and that's important. And it's okay. We didn't know, and now we know, and now we're aware of it, and we'll move forward and then be better.
But just for clarification, that doesn't mean not doing awesome things for women. Okay? Like, it doesn't mean not creating spaces where women are just gonna like kill it at volunteering. What's really
that raging feminist thing in there. Just
yeah. We do know that like for the longest time, charity work was where women had like their only power for a really, really long time. And Michelle's husband actually talked to me about this, about how like women had very few like areas of power, and it was usually the home and in volunteer work. And we're like still like, it's still my generation. I've seen, a lot of, misogyny throughout my whole life, and like where I know that that's my power in my domain is the home and in volunteer work. I know those are the two areas I'm allowed to like flourish, and run with things, and I'm going to be comfortable in that space. But part of breaking down all of these stereotypes and these roles is allowing and encouraging men to enter like our few two little spaces we got, that part of breaking that down, for the world and society at large is inviting them in that space and helping them be comfy with it within reason, within reason. We'll let them in, and then we can like hit them with the femininity. You're gonna love all this women energy. You're gonna love it, we promise. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, we can have compassion.
Well, in closing, we're going to go ahead and take on our podcast in a minute portion where we're just going to kind of break down the major points of today's podcast. Number one, if after careful evaluation, you discover your program or cause will benefit significantly from more male involvement, you can utilize short-term and long-term strategies that can help your charity appeal to more men, and will just help attract more volunteers overall.
Short-term ways to increase male engagement and volunteerism are directly asking men to get involved, create volunteer opportunities with specific delegated tasks and goals, and rewarding volunteer efforts with recognition, trophies, or mementos, or even t-shirts.
Long-term ways to increase male engagement in your cause can include regular media campaigns that highlight male involvement in humanitarian service, and creating regular repeat charity events for men that are fun, competitive, and also impactful.
Do take the time to study, evaluate, and challenge the things that are and aren't working in recruiting volunteers within your organization. And that's podcast in a minute. If you love those topics, please watch the full episode or listen to the full episode on anywhere that you like to listen to your podcast, because we're on all the things. Our do-gooder feature of the month is June. So June is Alzheimer and Brain Awareness Month. So we are featuring Memory Matters Utah, founded by Luann Lundquist. And she founded that in 2012, and they are doing some really cool things. Their mission statement is Memory Matters' mission is to reduce isolation and increase wellness for individuals with dementia and their caregivers through activities, support, education, and consultations. Memory Matters Utah is an excellent resource for those living with dementia and their caregivers. Please visit, like, and follow them on Facebook to support their mission and stay up to date on important happenings. If you have a nonprofit you would like for us to feature, please list them in the comment or email us at hello@amonglionhearts.com.
And our do-gooder hype up message for today is nothing is so strong as gentleness and nothing so gentle as real strength. That's a quote from St. Francis de Sales. Among Lionhearts is a socially conscious marketing agency where we specialize in social media management and influencer marketing for the unique needs of charities and social enterprises. Let our team of experts manage your social media workload for you so you can get back to doing more good. Remember, every small act of courage, no matter how small, is not actually small at all. You, my dear, are standing among the Lionhearts.